Welcome to the Relaunch Your Career podcast. I am your host, Leah Lambert, career and interview coach and founder of Relaunch Me, where we help you find the work that you were meant to do. Today I've asked Nicola Crocco to join me on the podcast. Nicola has an extensive background working in recruitment, and we actually worked together for the same recruitment agency going on about maybe 15 years ago. Nicola is co-founder of Melbourne-based recruitment agency Talent Effect, and today she's going to give us some insights into how senior candidates can really excel during the interview process. Welcome to the podcast, Nick.
Thanks, Leah. It's lovely to be here.
So, Nick, I'd love to start by asking you to tell us about your background in recruitment and I guess some more information about what you're doing at Talent Effect and the industries that you specialise in.
Sure. So as you said, we're getting a bit old now. I've been in the industry for 15 years. And one of the notes that I thought about was that we did meet each other all those years ago at Lloyd Morgan. It was a different world back then.
They were good days, Nick.
They were fun days. Yes, so I've recently launched Talent Effect with my business partner, Lisa Canning. And that's the launch of our business has really been the silver lining that's come from this global pandemic that we find ourselves in. So Talent Effect, we're specialised mainly within the consumer sector, which is retail, wholesale, FMCG and services. And we recruit many senior roles with a focus on marketing, digital, e-commerce, product and operations. We also have a focus in the HR and learning and development area, and we do a lot of executive level appointments too at that C-suite level.
So Nicola, what are we, end of week 1 in lockdown 2 in Melbourne?
Yes. Yeah.
So quite interesting times for many of us. What are you and Lisa seeing out in the job market at the moment?
It's a really good question because we are seeing a lot of activity. We've had a really good start to our business. We've placed a few senior level roles. And we've got roles on. We've got over the next 2 weeks, we've got a lot of candidates out at interview across the market, across a number of different clients. In conversations with clients, we're talking about roles that they will be creating or organisational changes which will necessitate recruitment. So there is planning for recruitment. There are roles on. And we don't see that it's the doom and gloom that a lot of people are discussing in the market at the moment.
Well, that is great to hear. And it is quite consistent with what I'm seeing as well, because I've been surprised about the number of candidates who have been ringing in to book interview coaching sessions because they do have interviews scheduled at the moment. Obviously, they're Zoom interviews, but that's been, I guess, made me feel more optimistic about what's happening in the market, and that perhaps it's that there are still companies going ahead with their recruitment.
100%. And I think that positivity and optimism is really important for everybody's mindsets in this time too. And even though we know that there aren't the abundance of opportunities that there were pre-COVID, there are still opportunities there. And I think we have to look at what's in front of us and prepare as best we can for when we come out the other side.
Well, that's part of the reason why I've asked you on today. I've recently done a podcast about preparing for behavioural interviews and sort of the basics around what you need to know and the types of questions you can anticipate. But I was really keen to get you on to take that sort of to a next level, and particularly for perhaps more senior candidates in the market, to understand where senior candidates go wrong and some of the things that they need to be doing to be more competitive. So can I start by asking you what you expect of candidates as a bare minimum when they come to meet you to discuss a particular role?
Great. So this would be the advice that I would give for face-to-face interviews, which is slightly different for a Zoom or a video interview. I think we can get into that later on and talk about some of the nuances of a Zoom interview. And some of this may seem rudimentary, but it's a really good reminder for whatever level you're at, from graduate right up to executive level. So these would be my minimum standards of someone coming in. The first is that the candidate would be well researched. So whatever's available, a position description, I would have expected that they've read that and thought about how their background would be a fit to that and where it's a fit. If they know who the company is or who the role is with, that they would have done some research into the company, read annual reports or whatever information is out in the marketplace. Secondly, I would ask and expect that they come open and ready to listen and to share. And both of those pieces are very important, and I'll talk more about that later. This is where I get into the more rudimentary advice. I would expect a candidate to be dressed with care. And when I say that, it's not about a suit and tie these days. It's about coming professionally dressed. And my advice always to candidates is always err on the side of caution. No one's ever going to criticise you for looking more professional or too professional.
Exactly.
So, and a couple of my pet hates are: do not wear sunglasses on your head. Do not hold a coffee in your hand when you're coming to meet with me, because it just there's a casualness and a presumptuousness to that I think is perhaps a little bit less than ideal. Also, dial down on clunky jewellery or anything that's really distracting, like bangles that clink, especially if you're someone that gesticulates a lot. Dial the jewellery down. Go easy on perfume and aftershave as well, particularly for a face-to-face interview, because it can be really overpowering for the interviewer. If you're a smoker, do not light up beforehand. Bring a pen and paper, look prepared, be prepared to take notes, and importantly, have your phone turned off and in your bag. I wouldn't want to see your phone on the table.
Yeah, good advice. And interesting about the coffee, because I think there is this sort of sense that we go to a meeting with a coffee in our hand, but people forget that perhaps that's not appropriate. I'm not sure if you listened to one of our earlier podcasts that I did with Marge Glazebrook, and she was talking about a candidate who actually in a Zoom interview pulled out a kebab and started eating how do you feel about kebabs in the interview, Nick?
No, kebabs are definitely not on.
Oh, that's funny, isn't it? So when you are meeting with candidates, I mean, often in this market or any market, I guess, you might meet some really high quality candidates, but you can't obviously shortlist everyone.
Correct.
What are the key areas that you are assessing when you are making that decision as to who you're going to shortlist?
Yeah, great question. So I think the first thing I want to say about that question is, when I'm interviewing a candidate, I know the experience of the candidate. So I've read the resume. So I'm not there to necessarily talk about every facet of their experience per se. There might be some checks and balances through questioning around dates and clarifying employment gaps and so forth. What I'm assessing in an interview is key competencies that the candidate must have to fulfill the selection criteria, key behaviours that I need to see from the candidate to also fulfill that criteria, but most importantly, the fit and style of the candidate, the way they communicate, the way they handle certain situations. It's their, people call it the cultural fit to the organisation. And that's what I actually spend most of my time on in an interview.
Interesting. I mean, I often say to clients that there's three things. It's, can you do the job? Do you want the job? And will you fit in?
Yeah.
And usually, I guess, the first part is testing the technical, and which is often in the resume in terms of their experience, but then it's the behaviours as around more the soft skills, and then it's looking at culture fit and also their motivation, the reasons they actually want the job, and whether it's the right step for them for their career path.
Yes, and I think in this market in particular, that's very important, the motivational fit. because there are a lot of overqualified candidates applying for jobs that are technically beneath them, but people need to work. They need a job. They might be the main breadwinner in the household. So I think that poses some interesting challenges for recruiters as well as for the companies that are hiring. And it's around whether those companies can find ways to really maximise and utilise those skill sets that are coming in and engage and retain those employees if they do go for a more overqualified or more qualified candidate in the end.
For most clients that you work with, does it scare them off to have someone that is overqualified?
It's a very topical question, that one. And I think if I were to put a blanketed statement around it, I would say yes, because there's that whole concept of flight risk. And clients are saying, how could I possibly retain this candidate over a long period of time? As soon as the market picks up and that candidate can go off and earn another $100,000 somewhere else, they won't be here. But I think my advice and coaching to my clients is around understanding that people have recalibrated during this time and their expectations are different. The expectations of their lifestyles, their focus around balance and family time and personal interests and health and well-being is very different. So not everyone's looking to climb the career ladder. And there are a lot of very loyal candidates out there with some amazing skills that could be really grabbed a hold of by clients and leveraged if they did it in the right way.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I'm talking to a lot of senior clients who've been made redundant and having this time at home and this slower pace. A lot of them are like, well, actually, I'm not sure if I want a job with that much pressure and, all that stress anymore. I think I'd like to take a step back and be a bit more comfortable and have a better balance.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of that. And I know that my business partner, Lisa, is as well. It's very consistent.
The other thing I think will be really interesting that comes out of this is we've always talked about having a gap in your resume. And for some people, they have this major hang up, even if they've only been out of work for 2 or 3 months. It's like, oh my goodness, they'll be wondering why I've got this big gap.
Yeah.
Where I think, everyone now will expect people to have a gap on their resume and they probably won't even question it anymore.
I agree. I think gone are those days. And also because of the type of workforce that we're moving into, where it's more of that gig economy and there's a lot more contract style of opportunities around. I think too that people are not going to be so concerned over gaps.
Yeah. So obviously you're in a prime position to get feedback from clients about where candidates go wrong in the interview. And, obviously there's the obvious ones, not using the behavioural interview technique correctly, not having good examples, eating a kebab.
Sunglasses on your head, carrying a coffee.
What are some of the other general themes of feedback that you get from clients that perhaps aren't talked about as much?
I've got some thoughts on this that I've gathered over a long period of time, and I've recently written a blog about this as well. So it's been on my mind. The first, and this really applies to senior level candidates because they're so accustomed to being in the control seat in a room, in a meeting, they are leading the agenda. So they come to an interview and I think some find it hard to just leave that at the door and let themselves be interviewed. So that would be my first piece of advice. Let yourself be interviewed. Allow the interviewer to ask you questions and respond. So I'm almost saying respect the dynamic that there is an interviewer and an interviewee, and that's the way the whole meeting is structured and set up. If you're clever about it, you can still interview the interviewer by asking questions at the right times, but you have to really leave your ego at the door, come in, sit down and be open and let the person in the room drive and steer the questioning.
Really good feedback. When you say find the right time to ask the questions, I guess typically the interview process is that the interviewer asks the questions first, and then at the end the candidate has an opportunity to respond. However, to build good rapport, you sort of, I guess, turn the interrogation into conversation and make it a two-way street. When is the right time for a more senior candidate to ask some of those questions?
I wish that there was a recipe for this that I could give you. And I agree with your comment around the interview needing to be more like a conversation. And what I've found through my career is the more senior the candidate, the more it is like a conversation. It's very free flowing. But to my earlier point, you still have to respect that dynamic in the room and allow that interviewer to steer the questioning. But it brings me to my second point around silence. Silence being your friend in an interview, and that will actually create the space for the interviewee to ask questions at the right time if they use silence effectively.
So, can you give us an example of that?
Yeah. So, for example, and this is where an interview takes on more of a conversational tone. There's silence. For me, silence is important at the start of a response and at the end of a response. So at the start of a response, it's around taking a moment, and it might only be 2 or 3 seconds. It'll feel like an eternity to actually gather your thoughts before you respond. And then at the end, to finish what you're saying and then stop yourself from continuing on and let the thought sink. And then what you'll find is the dynamic in the room will be that the interviewer will pick up on that and possibly respond with something, and then that will give you the space to then come back with a question as well. So, yeah, it's hard to actually give any directions on it, but it's around if you give the space, it will create room for the conversation to evolve in the right way.
Good feedback. And I think you're right. Often people that don't like the silence, and if there is silence, they'll just continue talking to try and fill that gap. But they're often repeating themselves or perhaps going off on a tangent, which isn't relevant to the response anyhow.
Correct. And have you noticed when you are in conversation with someone that uses silence effectively, it can make you feel quite uncomfortable and you feel a need to fill the space. But when you embrace it, it's actually, it's a very liberating experience, and it allows everyone to think more clearly about what they're saying, and then the conversation takes on a different course often.
I love that feedback. And are there any other mistakes or any other areas that you would advise candidates to think about?
So, yeah, my third point here is to really draw links for the interviewer. So you take the legwork out for them, basically. And this is quite a sophisticated skill, and it actually takes quite a bit of confidence to do. And I wouldn't suggest you do it with every response, but if you could do it with a couple of your key behavioural type responses in an interview, I think it could be very effective. So I call it drawing the link. So after you've provided your example of tell me about a time, and then you go through the STAR formula, then you go one step further and you say, so based on my understanding of this role that we're here talking about today, the potential impact of this skill that I've just demonstrated to you for your organisation is X, Y, or Z. And that also shows that you've done your research. So you've thought about what the problems could be, what the challenges could be for the organisation, and how you could meet those challenges. And it is quite a sophisticated technique, and I have seen candidates use it, and it always makes me smile with happiness because it does take a level of confidence to do that, because you are effectively blowing your own trumpet and saying, well, I've done that over here. I can do that for you. You should hire me. But you're not saying it in so many words.
Yeah, well, look, when I coach, I talk about STARLA. So STAR, but then the L and the A, L is maybe what you learnt, and A is how will you apply the experience to the role you're interviewing for. And it shows the panel that you are anticipating what the challenges might be in the role and that you really understand what the role's about. And yeah, exactly as you say, linking your experience and how you can benefit them.
Correct.
So we're talking the same language, which is good, Nick.
We are. I love your little, is it an acronym for it, STARLA?
Yeah, STARLA.
Yeah.
So a star with an L and an A at the end. And when I talk to clients, I say, well, you may not use that all the time. It may not be appropriate to always link it. It might be just some of your responses where there is this opportunity to say, look, I've done this before and I know what this role is going to be about and the challenges are going to be, dealing with this sort of stakeholder, and I've done this before. And I can apply that same method and that strategy again, helping you.
I think it's brilliant, and I agree. I think it would be a bit trite if you did it with every single example, but if you're able to just aim it at a couple of key examples through the interview, it could be very effective.
Yeah, and it does seem to be well received by a lot of organisations, which is good.
Yes.
So, Nick, can we talk about follow-up after the interview? A lot of candidates ask me how they should follow up. Is it appropriate to follow up, when they should follow up? Because often you may not have the contact details or the email for everyone on the panel. What do you recommend and what do your clients like in terms of follow-up after an interview?
Yeah, so to answer this question, I think I'll take a step back. And my advice to candidates would be to take a bit of a lead role at the end of the interview to understand a couple of things. Understand how the organisation or the recruiter or the interviewer prefers to be communicated with. So are they an email? Do they prefer email? These days it's actually quite kosher to text in some instances.
Yeah, interesting. I probably wouldn't have suggested that to people. That's interesting.
Yeah, so a lot of my communication with candidates is via text. You'd be amazed. And I will get candidates that I don't even know and haven't even spoken to texting me out of the blue.
Well, look, I do too, but I guess I wouldn't have thought of recommending that as a way of following up after an interview. I thought that would be still a little bit casual.
I think you'd have to use your judgment and your feeling of connection with the recruiter. But what I would definitely do is get the recruiter to tell you what their preferred communication style is, so that you therefore know how you're going to actually get hold of them and most likely get a response out of them.
That's right. Yeah.
And then also make sure you ask them before the interview ends, what is their process? What is their timeline? When could I expect to hear from you? If I haven't heard from you by that time, would you mind if I followed you up?
Well, that's right. And then you don't feel like you're being a pest, and you don't have that confusion around when to follow up and how to follow up, because you know what date you're aiming for.
Correct. And as I'm old-fashioned, I still believe that a thank you email or letter in some cases is still, it's really valued, and not many people do it. So now if I get a thank you email, I do read it, and it does register with me that, okay, this candidate's got manners and professional courtesy, which goes a long way.
Yeah.
So I definitely advise that. And if you've been clever enough to have left the interviewer with some sort of document, some sort of SWOT analysis or description of a challenge that you see the business facing and how you could address it, this is a great way actually to really improve your chances. That's also a very good mechanism by which to follow up. So you could follow up with a thank you note and then say, if you had any questions on the document I left you, more than happy to address those. So you can keep that communication going.
Gives you an excuse to follow up.
It does. Any excuse to follow up.
So So tell me about Zoom interviews. So obviously pretty much, I know some candidates are still having face-to-face interviews, but not many. And a
Yeah.
lot of people find, well, often they're not used to technology to start with, but find it really difficult to build rapport, particularly if there's a number of people on the panel.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice on how people can use the right body language to try and connect with the interviewer?
I do. And it's very topical because a lot of my candidates have been really struggling with this because everything is more or less happening via Zoom, particularly down here in Victoria. And I have heard about some absolute train wreck Zoom interviews that have taken place where, interestingly, it's been more on the side of the client, the interviewer, where, you know, they haven't been making eye contact, they've been typing notes as the candidate's been talking. So there's been no real opportunity to build rapport in that instance. So yes, I do have some very good tips. I think if we focus on that ability to build rapport, in order to build rapport, you've got to feel comfortable and confident. So what you've got to ask yourself as a candidate is, all right, how can I set this Zoom up so that I feel comfortable and confident? So I think be as prepared as you would be if you were going for a face-to-face interview, and basically all of my tips apply that I gave before for a face-to-face interview. Be as prepared. Get your technology working beforehand. So test it with somebody, you know, a family member, make sure your mic's working. I would actually advise investing in a proper mic, because when the sound is very clear and no one's struggling, it allows for a very easy conversation. Be a bit early, be sitting ready so that there are no glitches. Make sure that your lighting is to your liking. Your background is sort of plain and clear. You don't want any distractions happening in the background. Make sure that your proximity to the camera allows the people on the other end to really see the expressions on your face. So I would advise having, you know, just sort of the top of your shoulders showing within the frame, and make sure the camera angle is you're liking it. So you're feeling good about the way that you're looking. And we all know what I'm talking about there. And don't look at yourself. So make sure that you look at the people or look at the little camera on your computer. I think that's a trap that a lot of people fall into. The other piece is, I find, especially when there's a panel on a Zoom, that is the most difficult, because no one can read the body language and the tone. So there's a lot of speaking over others and people not being able to finish sentences. So again, I go back to use silence as your friend and don't speak over people. So allow people the time to ask their question, make sure that no one else is going to jump in, and then respond. And you would hope that they would then reciprocate.
Yeah, even more important on Zoom, isn't it? And I'm obviously doing all my coaching on Zoom, and a lot of people are using the green screen with the photo background. Yeah. And I do find that it's like, I had a client yesterday who had a picture of, might have been the French Alps or something, but his head was going in and out of the mountain the whole time I was talking to him. And it's just hugely distracting. Like it would have been much better for him just to had a plain wall behind him.
Yes.
So would you recommend just plain bedroom wall or whatever, rather than the beach scene or the
I definitely would. I think scene. That's fun for a team when you're Zooming with your team, but for an interview, I think a plain background, maybe a little plant off to the side, a bit of greenery is always nice, but nothing to, you don't want fern fronds touching your head or anything like that. So the plainer and simpler, the better in that situation.
I agree. So Nick, it's going to be a more competitive market post-COVID from what we're seeing. What are 3 of your biggest tips for candidates who do want to improve their chances of securing employment soon?
Yeah. The first would be, this is a mindset tip. You have to understand that finding a job is your full-time job when you're looking. So use your time wisely, plan your time, have activity planned every day around improving your resume, your profile, a networking opportunity. There is so much that can be done. It's endless. But really take it with that level of seriousness, because it is competitive out there. So that's number one. Number two is invest in yourself. So you have to spend money to make money, right? Spend money on getting your resume looking fabulous. And, this is, Leah, where you come into the picture. And I've referred so many candidates to you because you do such a fabulous job of this. It is worth the money. And these days, your resume is often going through an ATS, an applicant tracking system. It needs to be optimized, keyword optimized, ATS ready, so that it goes to the top of the pile. And you'll likely need professional help to do that. Your LinkedIn profile, you need to make sure that that is looking 100% schmick. You might even invest in your personal image, building your network. There is so much to be done, but don't shy away from spending a bit of money to allow yourself to put your best foot forward. And there are so many resources online too that are free, but then you won't necessarily get that personalised approach that you would if you came to Relaunch Me.
Thanks for the plug, Nick.
Anytime. And my final tip is to seek clarity. So right now, if you don't have a job and you are in lockdown, you have got this gift of time to really find out what you're about. So read some Simon Sinek, find your why, understand what your value is, so that you are crystal clear when you go to market on what your point of difference is. Why would someone hire you next to the other 300 candidates? And that those are real numbers that recruiters are sifting through. So to just summarize that, understand that finding a job is your full-time job. Number two, invest in your candidacy, spend money to make money. And number three, just seek clarity, find out what makes you tick.
Yeah, I agree. Particularly that third one, I think the key difference will be those people who do what we call have a personal brand. They actually know what they want, what they're good at, what they're interested in, what value they can bring. That will be, and people, they've got the time now to really go through that self-assessment and understand that. And I think it's those candidates that will stand out a little bit more from the competition, depending on the industry they're in and obviously what's happening in the job market over the next few months.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we've got resources at our fingertips. There's just no excuse while we've got this time and resources to, you can work that stuff out and get very, very clear.
Great tips, Nicola. Can you tell us how people can find you and find out more about Talent Effect if they're looking for some assistance in the future?
Absolutely. You can go to our website, which is talenteffect.com.au, or you're welcome to email me, and my email address is Nicola, Nicola, @talenteffect.com.au. And happy to start the communication there.
Well, thank you for those great insights, and all the best for the rest of what is going to be a crazy 6 months.
Yes, it is.
I will look forward to hopefully having you on again in the future, Nick.
Thanks, Leah. Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Relaunch Your Career. If you did, please subscribe, share with your friends, leave a review, or connect with us on social media at Relaunch Me Career Consulting. If you have any questions about the episode or the work that we do, then contact us via the website relaunchme.com.au. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.